नमस्कार विजू भाऊ.
तरी बरंच शिकाय भेटलंय ना. ते काय झालं काही जण म्हणले दोन एकदा जमणार, मग एम ला एक विषय घेतला ना.
शुरू नहीं हुआ क्या ये? जरा खुल जाना।
Hello everyone. A very good afternoon to one and all. I hope you all are safe and healthy wherever you are. We at Dr.Babasaheb Ambedkar Mahavidyalaya, Amravati feel extremely privileged to host this national webinar. Hello everyone. A very good afternoon to one and all. I hope you all are safe and healthy. Continue. Starting person. So, good afternoon and welcome to this national webinar. Before we launch, let me acknowledge the presence of our prominent guests, dignitaries, and participants. Thank you all for marking this spectacular event by your gracious presence. I feel honored to welcome our distinguished guests, eminent speakers, and august audience who are connected with us on this virtual platform today. At the outset, I pay tribute to the father of Indian Constitution, Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, great social reformer, Saint Gadge Baba, our patron, the guiding spirit of our trust, late Shri Dada Saheb Gawai, and all the literary maestros who penned down protest and anguish in the non-violence form. That means by penning down the literary works on protest. My due respects to Honorable Acharya, Mrs. Kamaltai Gawai, the founder president of Shri Dada Saheb Gawai Charitable Trust, Amravati, under whose aegis Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar Mahavidyalaya runs and is affiliated to Sant Gadge Baba Amravati University, Amravati. The trust, Shri Dada Saheb Gawai Charitable Trust, Amravati, has more than 42 institutions comprising from primary education to senior colleges, technical and professional institutes. It is recognized as the Buddhist minority institution by the government of Maharashtra. Dr.Babasaheb Ambedkar Mahavidyalaya, established in 1972, is the parent institute of the trust. Before we begin, I would like to take you to the literary journey. I mean the objective of the national webinar, the purpose, the theme of the webinar. Now, the most effective protest literature, as Stauffer said, is always the literature in search of a new form. The term protest is changing with time and age. The literal meaning of protest may be the idea of showing displeasure or oppose to an idea, event, or situation, belief, or event. But in a broad sense, it is a way to show a new perspective, a way towards hope, the other side of the coin, thinking some solution to the problem. Protest literature, or any other literature for that matter, is not merely just creative writing. It's a tool of entertainment or knowledge. But literature is a wheel of revolution, a place for a sense of justice. Protest literature opens up for the writer and reader an alternative window unto the world of have-nots. The African Americans, the feminists, the gay literature, child labor, the Dalit literature, and the literature of 9/11 aftermath. The theme is revolutionary in nature and spirit, along with the result of awareness and exposure to one religion in this world, and that is the religion of humanity. The writers and poets created a bountiful corpus of literature since the 8th century AD till date. They did express their resentment against unjust economical, social, and unfair treatment. But, oh, what do we see today? Just 2 days back, my prayers for the victim of Hathras in UP. It's so sad. Do you think this is the protest of nature? What is going on today? The pandemic 2020 that we are facing? And so we are virtual. Otherwise, we would have been live in this national webinar today. And what do you think? This pandemic is the protest of nature, the Mother Earth. We humans need to understand this because nature is the greatest teacher. And we have learned life lessons in this pandemic. Well, let us learn more ideological about this theme from our eminent personalities and our distinguished speakers. Now, I would like to invite our Honorable Principal, Dr. Anjan Kumar Sahai of our college, to formally welcome our guests, dignitaries, and scholars who have joined us today on this virtual platform. Honorable Dr. Anjan Kumar Sahai.
Hello everyone. Honorable President of Sri Dada Saheb Gabai Charitable Trust, Kirti Tai, Secretary of the Trust, Honorable Rao Sir, organizers of this function, Dr. Babasah, Kamble Sir, and librarian of our college, Mr. Sandeep Khandare. They have done really wonderful job in organizing the function and inviting all of you to join this webinar. The theme of the today's seminar is literature protest. Before I start welcoming guests here, let me say something about the protest literature. Why protest? And what is the meaning of protest? How it differs from what is known as resistance? There must be some difference between protest and resistance. Protest, of course, begins with when I say I don't agree. I don't agree with anything. Whereas resistance is, more bitter in nature. It may be expressed like this, that if I don't agree, I will not allow the things to happen. That is resistance. Today's topic is literature of protest. Dear friends, protest is inherent in human beings. This is our nature. We protest. We protest against injustice. We protest when our freedoms are curbed. We protest when something wrong we see happening in society. We protest. We raise the banner of protest. Since time immemorial, protests have been there. We see that during medieval ages, there were saints, there were writers who talked about protest. You might have heard about the Sufi poets, Sufi writers. Even the Bhakti movement itself talks about inequality in society. They were against it. They were against the Brahminical order. They were against the suppression of the downtrodden people. They said they were of the contention, they were of the belief that love alone transcends all barriers. Love is all powerful. My dear friends, not only this, we see when we read the medieval literature or a medieval movement, we see there have been poets in Maharashtra, Sant Jnaneshwar. Do you know he was excommunicated? Why? Because he wrote commentaries on Puranas and Vedas. He was excommunicated to Dalits. He was labeled as Dalit. His contemporary Eknath was equally punished because he raised his voice against the suppression of the Dalits. They are all equal in their sense. We might also know, it would be very pertinent to mention herein few lines about Ramanujacharya, who established Vishisht Advaita Parampara. They were the Vaishnavas, and they have fixed alvars, and out of 12 alvars, 3 are from Dalits, and they are worshipped today, they are adored today by this section Vaishnavas. In 13th century, in the year 1936, I'm reminded that the Travancore king had passed a proclamation allowing entry of the Dalits into temples. There have been great leaders, great kings who have spoken about, who have raised the banner of protest, who have led the protests in society. In Marathi literature, we see Namdev Dhasal, Baburao Bagul. We also see Dr.Babasaheb Ambedkar. We see Anna Bausathe. They all wrote about the Dalits, and they sought remedies for their oppressed treatments. Dear friends, in Dalits, which is an outcast in Indian caste system, have always faced a lot of trouble, a lot of discrimination at the hands of the forward caste. Dr.Babasaheb Ambedkar started an ideology. For them, he started some movements. Even our Constitution of India have so many articles dealing with safeguarding the interest of the tribals, of the scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, of all the downtrodden people. Despite that, the exploitation of the down castes, exploitation of the downtrodden people is going unabated, and still protests are there. Protests is not only in Dalit literature, protests everywhere. In every genre of literature, we see protest. Even when we talk of feminism, the women who are claiming equal rights, why? Because they have been subjected to a very subordinate position to men. Men have always tried to dominate them. In various countries, not only in India, abroad also, we can see in Britain, Virginia Woolf started A Room of One's Own. She wrote the book, and where she talked about women's liberty, women's allowing freedom to women. In French also, we know there were many writers like Hélène Cixous, Irigaray. They also raised the banner of revolt against the men domination. We can see that Hélène Cixous, in her book Laugh of Medusa, coined a term, a chrysler feminine, which talk about writing by females. Similarly, we see in America, Kate Millett, who wrote Sexual Politics. I mean to say, all of these writers have contributed to towards the creation of protest literature, or literature of protest in India too. Similarly, we find quite kind of a number of women writers who are talking about women's freedom. Most vociferous among them is away today, Shobha Day. She has written a number of novels. I just said it has been found that all her novels start with a letter S, and critics are of the opinion that S stands for sex. Whatever may be there, but Shobha Day is quite, she can be considered as a revolutionary writer. She has called their men by different names. He has even gone to the extent of abusing human beings, not human beings, men. She called men as dogs. About men, she says, men are high on ego, low on performance. So these all things remind us that what literature of protest could be. Today, the guests are there from various parts of the country. From Hyderabad, we have Rahul Kamble with us. We have a resource person from Nagpur. I think they will do justice today. They will talk in depth about what protest literature is. And I welcome you all, welcome all the participants, all the resource persons, all others who have known us or might not be knowing us. I welcome all of you on behalf of the management, on behalf of the staff of the college, and myself personally. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your earnest welcome address and a glimpse into the literary world. Thank you so much. We are highly honored that our Honorable President, Mrs. Kirtitai Arjun, she is in Mumbai today, but she is amongst us on this digital platform. We are indeed grateful to you, Honorable dear ma'am, for readily accepting our invitation and for your gracious presence. I request you to inaugurate this purportous event. Honorable Kirti ma'am.
Thank you, Varsha. Thank you so much for the lovely welcome that you've given me. Okay. And I really felt good to hear Dr. Anjan Kumar also. I mean, very good inputs is given on literature of protest.
Tai, please unmute yourself.
I had unmute.
Okay. Unmute.
Okay. Did you all hear me first?
Yes. Now. Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. Okay, Varsha, thank you so much for the wonderful introduction that you've given me, and thank you for welcoming me. And I also heard Dr. Anjan Kumar Saheb. He's given good inputs on literature, protest literature. Good inputs, I would say. Some of them really very interesting to be discussed, and some of them very good and interesting to be debated also. Okay. So let me first start by paying my deep gratitude, homage to the enlightened one, my guru, who has given us the important message of power of universal love. Additionally, he also talks about analysis and wisdom too. I also pay my gratitude to the father of Indian Constitution, the Constitution which is the spine and backbone of our country, He's been our true inspiration. I like to also remember all the social reformers, all the social activists, all the literary masters who have contributed for the development of our nation for generations to come. I remember my father too, who has always diligently and relentlessly worked on the path paved by Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, who is always an eternal inspiration for us. I'll also like to remember my mother, Kamal Gavai, who is the one who's laid the foundation of Dadasaheb Gavai Charitable Trust and who's given a form to the vision of Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar and my father, Dadasaheb Gavai. Firstly, I'm really delighted to know that Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar Mahavidyalaya, the entire staff, committee, organizers have decided to have a webinar on such an innovative topic. I guess this is a very, very new topic and I have not really heard much about this discussion and hence it has really interested me quite a lot. And I'm equally delighted because what I understand, we have a great scholars for discussion today. We have Dr. Rahul Kamble and we have Dr. Pratik Banerjee. Sir, I welcome both of you all wholeheartedly on behalf of Dadasaheb Gavai Charitable Trust. I welcome you. And it's good to see, I see Rao sir also here, who is the backbone of our trust. I see Dr. Anjan Kumar sir also. It's really nice to see all of you all. And last but not the least, all the participants in this webinar. I welcome you all the scholars, all the researchers. It is the participants basically, apart from the speakers, it is the participants and the active participation, which really brings meanings to such seminars, to web seminars, because it is a collective effort that will come out and an outcome that comes out of this is a collective effort because these are not formalities. We need to really analyze, study, and then come out with some other new ideas. Well, literature is the mirror and the reflection of the society. It deals with the mode of thinking patterns, innovative ideas. It develops consciousness. And the best part of it is it brings us, all of us together, even in such pandemic times. Now, literature of protest, as I understand, is literature in search of new form. It's about new hope. It's about new solutions. It is about even gaining some new wisdom and a new outlook to the problem. Generally, sometimes protest is taken as a very negative connotation. It is taken as an anger. It is taken as an frustration. But to me, it is an avenue to get different perspectives of different people, scholars, intelligent scholars, researchers. It's only when we get into such kind of activities can we see things in various angles. Honestly, it's as I said, this is a really, really very new subject and I would love to know more about it. And we have two experts who are going to be giving us an insight into this subject. So I will, of course, leave this discussion to them. I now finally announce the inauguration of this webinar, Literature of Protest. And I hope this theme will open floodgates of wisdom, knowledge, especially for the budding scholars, researchers who have joined this national webinar. Finally, I really feel good and I'm really congratulating the organizers of this webinar, Dr. Varsha Gavande, Dr. Kamble, Dr. I think Dr. Khandare has also been really actively involved in terms of technical support and all. So I really want to congratulate you all. I also want to appreciate the effort that the principal and the entire staff indirectly or directly have taken to make this webinar a success. I wish you all the best. All of you all, please take care during these times. Be safe and take care of yourself and your family. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much for your cogent message and lovely words. You are always the motivating spirit behind every event and task that we perform. You have given us your precious time in spite of your busy schedule. We are charmed by your eloquence, your language, and your words. Thanks a lot, ma'am.
You're most
Now-
welcome, Varsha.
Thank you, ma'am. Now, we are moving towards our first plenary session. I am pleased to introduce Honorable Dr. Rahul Kamble from Hyderabad. Dr. Rahul Kamble is an associate professor in English and foreign language, University, Hyderabad. He teaches in the Department of Indian and World Literature. He offers PG courses on childhood studies, comics narratives, Indian women playwrights, American literature, and African American literature. He has his PhD on Indian women playwrights in translation. He has co-edited an anthology, Approaches to Childhood, Issues and Concerns in Creative Representations in November 2015. A gem of a person. I would say, sir, that our character is not defined by the battles we win or lose, but the battles we dare to fight. On this note, I want to tell you that at such a young age, you have achieved a lot of credentials, and that too in Hyderabad. I welcome you, sir, and I request you to please deliver your address. Honorable
Thank you.
Dr. Rahul Kamble.
Thank you, Dr. Babasahji. Hope I am audible.
Yes, sir.
First, I would like to thank all of you, Dr. Babasah, Honorable Principal Anjan Kumarji, Kirti Tai, then Dr. Shodhodan Kamble, and then Dr. Khandare. It has been a pleasure. Like, you know, when Dr. Kamble called me, it was a surprise. And I immediately accepted when he told me that it is from our college. Like, you know, when you hear Dr. Ambedkar's name anywhere in the world, you feel like, you know, okay, whatever is, you know, task, whether they ask you to speak or, you know, do run any other task, you know, it's your duty, you're duty bound. Wherever you are, you should be contributing in a little.
So please unmute yourself. Kamble, sir.
I did it. Somebody did it.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Okay, anyway, fine. It happens. I mean, we are all running online classes and all. We are used to this.
Yes.
We have to bear.
Yes.
Even if I give something like, you know, 100%, then I'm expecting that 60% will reach to people. That's what we are doing or managing things now. Okay, as I thanked everyone, I'm not very good at that, but it's my pleasure to be here. It's my pleasure to talk about protest literature, especially Dalit literature. It's also like, you know, I should also congratulate, as Kirti Tai has congratulated all of you, that, you know, when the entire literary discourse was something like pandemic, you know, affected by that, and everybody is using pandemic literature and all. Good that we didn't lose sight of it. You know, this is protest and the resistance is the core. You know, these are the core ideas of humanity, and you know, in the literature we find that. So good that you have decided, you have chosen to stick to that, and so I really appreciate that. I should congratulate you. I'll talk directly then. I'm not able to share my screen.
Yes, sir.
You have to enable.
Yes, sir, you are able to share now. Please go ahead, sir.
Can you see my screen?
No, sir. Sir, screen. Yes, sir. Yes. We can see.
Right.
Yeah. Please continue, sir.
Okay. This is the title of Protest in Dalit Literature, the Means for Education and Negotiation. I would like to read this from Audre Lorde. He says, poetry is not luxury. For women, then poetry is not a luxury. It is a vital necessity of our existence. It forms the quality of light within which we predicate our hopes and dreams towards the survival and change. First made into language, then into ideas, then into more tangible action. Audre Lorde, African-American poet. Literature, when we talk about locations, where literature is produced or where literature is, conceived. Literature is an idea or manifest of literature also. We have to also understand what function it performs. So depending on, it may be luxury for some because the location entertains that time, and the location allows that function to be performed by people. So there it can become luxury. It can afford luxury to the person who is indulging with this idea of literature, but it may not be true for all. So depending upon the location, we interpret literature is. This is what I have prepared. The abstract. Dalit literature, in a sense, carrying forward the ideas and arguments originating from the seminal texts, such as Fule's Slavery and Dr. Ambedkar's Annihilation of Caste, and other writings. I'm just taking few examples. In 40-45 minutes, I'll be dealing with only a few things. So I may not be talking about too many writers and texts, because then it will be a horizontal presentation. I'll be just, this is hit and run. You just mention the texts, but you don't actually deal with the texts and all. So what I'll be doing, I'll be concentrating only on so that I can argue properly. So what basically these texts do is, they protest against the inequality, discrimination, and injustice. However, if we read it exclusively in terms of articulation or manifestation of protest, we would miss the core of its genesis, and that is education and negotiation. I'll come to that when I start the presentation. While resisting the inequality, discrimination, and marginality, it was upon the writers to educate people about their secondary means used for their deprivation and idiom of discrimination by transforming literature into a discursive act. How do we discourse? How do we discuss? By means of analyzing, reasoning, arguing, at times questioning, subverting. There are different methods in which we make this a discursive act. It becomes a platform, a practice as well. Educating the world about their fallacious understanding of the marginalized, because a lot depends on how marginalized are understood. But also to equip. It doesn't end with that unless it equips the marginalized in the art of negotiation. The literature negotiates with the aestheticized literary space by creating their own canon, establishing their own theory of aesthetics, huge body of translation, criticism, by being part of curricula, academic research, and this is how it spreads. And brings itself to aestheticized or critical discourse. I'll be dealing with one or two poems, and I'll not be reading it in detail, but I'll be giving examples from the poems. I'm glad that Ambedkar actually mentioned Desai. By taking Namdev Desai's poems, I would explain how he makes life under the margin.
मैंने आज फिर वो लेटर लिख के दिया यहाँ पर.
Somebody speak.
So, unmute kar lo. So please unmute yourself once more. There's some technical issue, I think. I request the participants. To please mute your mics. So I request Dr. Rahul Kamble to please unmute your mic, sir.
Yeah.
And please continue.
Okay, can you see my screen now?
Yes,
Am
sir.
I audible?
Yes, sir, yes.
Okay. Right. So I'm taking these examples, how he makes life under the margins, subject of his poetry, educates the world of its fallacies and makes the world under the margins negotiate with this world. Reading protest in terms of its educative and negotiating values is very crucial and important in the wake of recent attempts to obliterate the protest by derogating, brandishing, or criminalizing. I mean, it is especially necessary these days. I'll be taking one example. I just one or two examples from slavery. I mean, how examples in the sense how slavery can be read. We know how we associate Phule with education and Dr. Ambedkar with negotiation. This is how I am trying to do. What he did in slavery, we all know. I mean, we have read slavery many times. What he does is he refutes misconceptions and myths about human beings. You know how he talks about the origins of human beings and all. Their origins, ideals, and pursuits by giving a scientific and logical argument. Basically, if we look at, I am also putting it in terms of the binaries, like, superstition versus education. So what literature basically does is, in this, how it brings in the discursive aspect is, looking at the things, looking at, all the issues in terms of the binary, because you are also protesting against the binarized existence that has been given to you or that has been imposed upon you. So his argument is also like that. We can actually make sense at it from these binarized positions of the two texts, or various kinds of text on two sides, basically. Now also think about situating slavery, the book, against the texts, Manusmriti, Smriti, and so many other texts. Justifying slavery of a certain kind of people is also a strong protest. Just imagine that time slavery comes being published, and then it's available on bookstall, or people reading it, or people talking about, and then immediately comparing it with the other texts. It actually sets the dialectical conversation. Something is written here, something is written there. So somebody talks about slavery, somebody talks about freedom, like that. It also educates the subordinated about the reasons why they are subordinated, because unless they are educated about it, they won't be willing to see that, why I'm subordinated, and should I be able to, or should I think about protesting? Should I think about resisting? Unless, Babasaheb always said, make the slave conscious about his slavery. Then only he will rise and say, oh no, I am a slave, then I should do something about my status. So it's also, putting it in perspective for the subordinated, for the, marginalized. It also gives, I mean, it doesn't, see, when we say protest, or resist, we always are asked about, then what is the alternative? So he had an alternative. It gives an alternative location. And that is basically the education. That is basically the identity which you gain by educating yourself. So it gives an alternative location and a faculty to the lower castes to examine everything critically. I mean, unless you have an independent position, unless you have an independent location. I mean, when you are looking at something, something that enslaves people, something, ideas or ideologies or practices, then you have to stand out. So how do you stand out unless you are educated, unless you have an identity of your own, which arrives at or which you have earned by educating yourself? So this is about labeling and stereotyping and the identity. When you talk about rational and logical argument about, and these are basically the core of humanity. And when he does it in the text, slavery, it actually saves the text, from being topical or temporary. Nevertheless, it becomes the backbone of all such movements against the subordination. And this is the difference between upsurge and an evolution. We know the revolutions which are based on, immediate upsurge of emotions and all may not, last long. Fule's movement was basically based on educating. Once a person is educated, it remains with him or her for a long time, till the end of his life. Uh, he evolves, he matures, and he has a location, as I said earlier. He has the critical faculty and all. That makes the transformation, living for a long time. It is not an upsurge which will be wiped out or which will be replaced by any other upsurge, movement forward or backward. It is long lasting. When we talk about Dr. Ambedkar, I'm looking at it in this way: socio-cultural and religious and political negotiation. Think about, I mean, we all know Annihilation of Caste and the context in which it was written. Initially, he was not willing to go. Then he accepted that, okay, I got an opportunity, let me go there. That Todak Mandal, the meeting, I'll be presiding over it, and I can put forward my argument there. He saw that as a platform for, negotiating different castes and, explain to them. I am looking at it, as a negotiating act. He always, think about roundtable conferences or, all other participations that he had in all the meetings, including the drafting committee, for example. When he was talking about Buddha and Dhamma, this is how I am looking at, different activities of negotiation. I'm not able to include all kinds of activities. I'm just selecting it. Inter and intra-religious negotiation. Buddha and his Dhamma was born of, we know, Ambedkar's opposition to discriminatory nature of Hinduism. So he's actually negotiating. There, if I have to leave, what I will have my identity, in where, whether I'll be following any other religion, a creed, or a path, or what that, path will be, or what that destination will be. And he starts negotiating among different texts and religions. Rational basis, when he wrote the text, he was giving a rational basis to the religion. Or, we know, it says, making the distinction between religion and Dhamma, for example, or status of people who follow it, or independence of the follower. Inside the religion also, he was negotiating with the practices which may not be liberating. With the practices come rigidity, with the practices come many other things which, may not be appropriate for him to prescribe for the followers. So he tries to engage with them. He tries to negotiate with them, the past and the present and the future. And then he creates an idea. This is, I look at it, an exercise of a negotiation. Also think about, his participation in the debates of the drafting committee, stating the constitutional status for the aspirations of the depressed classes. It was not, nothing but the strong act of negotiations. We just imagine the conditions, the people around him, and what he was negotiating. Right. So this is basically coming from, I mean, we can also read it. It was a protest basically, right? It was a resistance basically. It was refutation of claims. It was giving alternative perspectives. It was giving alternative interpretations. It is strong, criticism in strong words in the face of the people. But as I said, if we only limit it to the discussion of protest, we actually lose the core. And that's why I'm putting it in that perspective. Also think about, I'm not giving all the tropes, I'm selecting a few only. When we read, we are familiar with the literature. Few tropes come in my mind immediately. The literature talks about, equality, because it always struggled against inequality. It always struggled for equality. So it's but natural the discourse of equality comes in literature. How it happens? Choice of a protagonist over hero. There is no hero as such. We all know Ambedkar's opposition to the idea of hero and hero worship. And the story of hero in a conventional sense is to delegate the power to think and act to the hero. Others have to be sitting silent, and the hero comes and hero does. And that's what we see on the screen, on stage. So wherever there is a concept of a hero, we delegate the power to think and act to him or her. What happens is, here, it's the hero, there is implied inequality also, because the entire attention of the audiences as well as the people on the stage is towards hero, what he does. It is about it. It's his tragedy. It's not somebody else's, work and all. And all the characters are very subservient, and they have to contribute to the effectivity of the tragedy of this hero. So the moment we say that, the moment hero comes, it automatically implies that all other characters are not as equal to him. So basically, it has that inherent inequality when we have a hero-based thing. So largely we have in the literature, and that's what I look at it when I'm talking about the literary tropes. Protagonist may be of a different kind. I mean, he may be talking, he may be acting, he may be subverting and all the status and the number of aspects that can be included in it while analyzing it. There's another thing that we always see, that there is no passive acceptance of a situation. There is no conclusion and a resolution, which we see largely in literature. Think about the tragedies and all. The play is the best play which has a proper conclusion, right? Whether if it is a tragedy, then you have catastrophe. When you have a comedy, you have a resolution, right? But the things end on the stage. There is nothing to be carried forward. There is nothing that we have to do. Dalit literature doesn't, reflect that, because obviously, if Dalit literature is a reflection of the life, Dalits have not resolved, or Dalits have, the situation has not been resolved by anybody. So it's always, the perpetual struggle of Dalits to find something, to get something, to reach somewhere and all. It has not concluded yet. He has not, or she has not reached to a destination. Even if some individuals have reached, obviously then you have people behind and they will be marching and all. So it's an ongoing process. So there is no end, there is no conclusion to it. And there is always an idea of parivartan, change in the status from this to that, from one location to the other, from one stage to the other stage and all, from no education to education. Also, we have, when we look at, if we think about Jina Amundsen or prisons, we broke. I gave this example. It is we. It's not one. The voice is, the narration is communitarian. Even at times, you will find one character speaking, but the language he speaks or the language she speaks is always communitarian. How does it happen? You must have visited Diksha Bhumi, and you see lakhs of people there. Coming on the day of Dhamma Chakra Pravartan, occasion. I see, like, we do not have, Dalits do not have I'm carefully putting it, the individualism that we define, or the moments of individuality or individualism that we see across the world, or especially in the or the personal liberty, the movements for liberty and all, which prompts from the individualism. That involves actually a risk, because individuals scattered are at risk. When they come together, these are basically the claims that they have: claims for the rights, claim for education, claims for share in resources, natural resources. All these claims basically get together. So when you go to a place like Diksha Bhumi, you actually see aggregation of claims, because when these claims are scattered throughout the year, they are irrelevant. Nobody bothers about looking at somebody's application. Nobody's Dr. Varsha mentioned about Hathras's incident. Think about, these are individuals who are immediately made into individuals, and they will be easily targeted, killed, maimed, raped, whatever they can do. Yeah, and it happens. So these voices basically aspire to be communitarian. It talks for community, it talks from the community, right? Like that. Dalit literature basically comes from experience. So there is experiential revision of all the aesthetic tropes. I'm summing up different kinds of tropes with this one point. Community experiences decide the aesthetics. It's the experience. And that's why I put the impetus is experiential. And from the impetus comes authenticity also, because it has come from the first-hand experience of the person who has gone through it. I'll come to Dasal's poetry, and I'll give a few examples here and there what he does. We all know Dasal's what Namdev Dasal writes. Golpita, for example. I'm just giving 2-3 examples. What he does is, he brings people, places, and professions. In this case, Falkland Road, on the threshold of the decent world to the hygienized and sophisticated literary space. When I'm saying hygienized and sophisticated literary space, imagine about literary space in 60s and 70s and all, or even before that, I'm just referring, I shouldn't be saying this, but I'm referring Hirve, Hirve, Gar, Galiche, right? That kind of poetry and all, where, what is to be called as literature? What qualifies to be called as literature? What kind of poetry is to be, those questions. So he actually brings it there, these professions. That's why I'm using it, hygienized and sophisticated literary space. Now his poetry shows through the seams of the treatment of this marginalized world by the world which considers itself civil, right, cultured and progressive. I just remembered immediately the line from Narayan Surve's poem, My University. He says, that day I wrote on blank page of my mind, after going through the experience, these are the ways of the world of the shameless. Remember all the signs. This is how you are treated. So you have to remember what these signs are. What Dasal sees is the problematic nature of the labeling, terming of the people, places. I'm especially referring to the people in Falkland Road, the prostitutes, the pimps, and the people living there and surviving there, basically. And their professions under the margins, because it brings ignominy, wrath, and curse, and often the excruciating penalty on them. Basically, it is the problem. Just think about, brood upon the sentences that I have put here. You will easily understand what I'm trying to say. He sees that problem, because it's not just derogation that somebody is battling, but it is wrath, curse, and more than that, the huge penalty that is, insulted upon put on them. It's also, the poetry also, makes them conscious, people in Falkland Road. It's a rehumanizing discourse. If we, I'm sure you must have heard about this, healing narratives. And so this narrative, when talk about the people and their pain and the anguish and the anxieties and all, so bringing this subject and somebody reads it to them back, it's rehumanizing that, I become part of something. I become part of a poem, making people conscious about themselves. So it rehumanizes and creates the social consciousness in the subject. The subject, the people, otherwise are dehumanized, they are demonized, they are criminalized. So they are made conscious about their existence. They are not demonized, they are not dehumanized. They are very human beings. Now, he not only challenges their discursive annihilation. I mean, discursive annihilation in the sense, by talking derogatory about somebody, by calling out names, by stigmatizing and all. This is how we annihilate people discursively. But he doesn't do that only, but he also relocates them in the poetics of singing by celebrating and cherishing the life under these margins, which is very important. I mean, as I was talking about earlier, when Phule gives an alternative through the education, Namdev Desai gives them an alternative position. The position is to survive in fiction, to survive in literary narratives, which will compel people to think about them, which will compel people to push them towards and pull them towards it, which will compel people to see that this is my responsibility and I have to change. This is how, when you create a discourse about something, when he creates a discourse, I'm using it here, poetics of singing or celebrating, or, the entire life of the people under the margins. The poetics connects with the people outside this particular world and makes them understand their responsibility towards it, which it was doing. It was discussed in that way. I'm just giving this picture, you will see this. This is the form, actually, Municipal Corporation of Greater Bombay, Venereal Disease Clinic. He actually put that form. We all know the history of his work, his work with working with the prostitutions for the rights in the admissions in the hospital and all. So he worked. So what he did, he brought these two things together. Desai tears the hygiene. That's why I used earlier, hygienized literary space and idiom by inaugurating his poetry with the admission form of Venereal Disease Clinic. Right. Yeah, what he does is he argues that people fall into the places and professions not by choice, right? They are forced over there for various concerns, for various needs, concern for survival. They are equally reverent of them, I mean, their professions and their people, with utmost religious zeal like any other in the so-called decent world. I mean, what is problematic? The decent world sees, this world as problematic. But then how it is problematic, one has to explain. And he is just making an analogy that, how similar these two words are. So the decent world, actually, it's basically exposing the hypocrisy of the decent world in terming, in labeling, in stigmatizing, and in denying this particular world on the grounds of certain moral standards which are created somewhere by someone unknown. We don't know to follow or not. He compares the outsiders and their sympathies by saying their orthodox pity is no taller than a fucking road pimp. He doesn't wish the outside world to be sympathetic towards them, basically, and he resists that. It makes the position weak, actually. I mean, this is exactly I was referring to earlier. In tragedy, the audience has to sympathize with the with the suffering of the hero on stage. But the problem with sympathizing is that we just sympathize, say hi, you cry, you sit, you wipe your tears, and then you pick up your bag and purse and go back home, saying, I have done my duty. I shed tears. Problem with the sympathy is that he doesn't want that. That's why he compares and he tears, basically. And that's why I'm using this word also. He traces their ethical commitment. Then he concentrates on the people, under the margins. What he does is He traces their ethical commitments to their own experiences with their world and rejects their evaluation based on the scholastic morality taught from the objective or outside position. Society generally applies moral standards to evaluate the people there. He finds fault with that. That's what he is arguing. He considers their commitments equally valid and sacred. If you have read this point, I'm just arguing about that, the line of thinking that he has in the poem. He talks about, there is a poem, Mandakini Patil. He expresses dejection over their dehumanization by the visitors from the civil world. Now, basically, it is about the hypocrisy that the world has, even when the decent world maintains the distance and, mujhe kuch sahogar nahi, I don't have any relationship with that world. But basically, this world is created by them. This world thrives and survives on them because they have created the world for their needs and all. But then what happens? I mean, all this shit, like, this dirt is, this filth from the society is carried too. And then the body is dehumanized. And this body is dehumanized every day. These are the comments by Dilip Chitre and Vijay Tendulkar, what kind of world it is. Dilip Chitre says, as Namdev took me around Kamatipura, through its lanes and by lanes, it was like looking at life in poor people's hospital, ward after ward, and becoming aware of life as it has lived in terminal ward. There were dead ends everywhere and no opening in sight. This is a different location. What kind of poetry you expect from a location like this? Vijay Tendulkar says, the world of Namdev's poetry begins where the frontier of Mumbai's white-collar world ends and a no-man's land opens up. This is a world where the night is reversed into the day, where stomachs are empty or half empty, of desperation against death, of the next day's anxieties, bodies left over by being consumed by shame and sensibility. That's what Dasar was talking about in Mandakini Patil. Of insufferably flowing sewages, of diseased young bodies lying by the gutters, braving the cold by folding their knees to their bellies, of the jobless, of beggars, of pickpockets, of holy mendicants, of neighborhood tough guys who will come every now and then and trouble them. What Dasal is doing is basically, he is educating the world about its unempathetic understanding of it and its treatment of the world under the margins, the people and the places over there. He also refutes the claims of superiority, by the decent world in relation to the world under these margins. Also justifies the life of the marginalized on grounds of ethicality of their commitments. Commitment is based on instinct of survival, basically. Reverence to the places which protect them and their loyalty to their protectors. The place, basically. I mean, it may not be the people over there, but the place. Now, his world negotiates with the world. And this is very crucial. I mean, where lies the role of the literature, which I was talking about earlier. Literature creates that poetics, which helps them, as I said, resituate in the discourse, which helps them redefine themselves, which attracts the attention of the people, which makes them confront themselves, their ideas and all. So what it does, it by redefining the discursive practice, which defines and locates people on the basis of morality. For example, Falkland rule will be simply said, prostitutes, immoral life, immoral profession, illegal profession. And we just brandish it and the discussion is over. I mean, you don't need to investigate further. You can just close it. If you have watched the film Salam Bombay, the caretaker of the orphanage reads this line, par tum to vesha ho, and then she closes the file. Because the moment you start talking about the profession, and the discourse doesn't go further. I mean, the people in the decent world makes that morality check, whether to go ahead or not. The moment the morality issue comes in, the further discussion is stopped. So it actually redefines that by bringing in different discourses, by bringing in different experiential aspects. So the world which analyzes or evaluates people or locates people on the basis of morality, religion, social affinity, interdependence, and mutual exchange, he makes this world self-referential. Rather than you look for, the methods and modes, outside the decent world, he makes this world itself self-referential. So if you survive, you survive. You earn, you earn. You don't need to evaluate yourself on the parameters, on the criteria which are evolved somewhere else, because even if that world evolves those parameters and criteria, it may not be giving you sustenance of life. It's not useful for sustaining the life. Morality of prostitution versus justification of sex work on the grounds of survival. When you start looking at it like this, you will understand in what discursive angle he is arguing the life of the marginalized. Basah doesn't wish to integrate with the world above because there is a risk involved. The margins, by accepting the culturally imposed similarity and uniformity, the codes of sanitization and sacrality. Because this decent world will have a sanitizer. You sanitize and then you enter. But the sanitization means many things. It's not just some sort of purity or some sort of body purification or something like that. It is thorough negation of the entire existence of the person, everything, which is impossible for anyone to give up. If there are ills and evils, and if there are drawbacks, and if there is something to reform, that's where lies the work of the reformers and all. And he is open to reform. In fact, he himself was one of them who was leading them towards those reforms and all. He sees harrowing implications of socially acceptable enculturation and the purification. We all know how it happens. Instead, he justifies its place by maintaining its rationale to exist and negotiate for the amelioration of the plight by means of education, struggle for rights, and equal treatment. And here I'm just coming to the conclusion. I'm on time. What Basah does is, he tears the stigmatization of the marginalized. He educates the society of its misconceptions about the world under the margins, because a lot depends on them, clearing those misconceptions. It's similar to what Jyotirao Phule was doing, and makes them confront the reality that these places, there is a mistake, that these places, people and the professions were the result of, is also making the people confront of ignominious desires of the people in power. He also negotiates with the world and its cultural means by creating a poetics of celebrating the marginalized and the consciousness of its own. I conclude my presentation with this. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you once more for taking time out and marking this spectacular speech with full of learning, information, and elaborative ideas in your talk. Protest literature, as you stated, sir, means rehumanizing. Rehumanizing means, according to what I understand, is to look beyond. Look beyond in terms of gender, caste, and creed. The hygienized term that you used in your discourse needs to rethink today. Justice, liberty, and equality on the parameters of a sustainable society, not just for India, but at the world at large. I express my gratitude, sir, on behalf of my college and my trust. Thank you for giving us this time and your wonderful discourse. So now, friends, we move on to our second plenary session. The guest of our second session is Honorable Dr. Pratik Banerjee, a renowned and dignified personality in the field of English literature. For you, sir, I quote, "The world is full of diamonds and gems. The world is full of diamonds and gems. And today we have some of them. And one of you is, of course, Honorable Dr. Pratik Banerjee." Let me introduce another gem of personality today. Honorable Dr. Pratik Banerjee is an associate professor at Department of English, Hislop College, Nagpur. He is the former IQAC coordinator of his college. His areas of interest are cultural studies, film theory, medical humanities, post-colonial studies, trauma, theory, gerontology, and disability. He is also interested in higher education policy, quality assurance framework, and curriculum designing. He has been a keynote speaker and a resource person at several national and international conferences. He also delivered the annual endowment lecture in Loyola College, Chennai, Jyoti Nivas College, Bangalore, and the Royal Bhutan University. He has many publications to his credit and a member of esteemed committees. He is a certified trainer from TCS Bangalore. Friends, the list is endless, provided with credentials to his bio note. But as we are short of time, I think you should listen to Pratik Banerjee sir himself and just see the aura of the personality he belongs to. Sir, I request you to please address us on the topic issues of representations in the times of conflict, the literature of protest. Welcome, Honorable Dr. Pratik Banerjee. Please continue.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you for those effusive words. Good afternoon. I'll change the protocol. First, good afternoon to all the participants. It's not, and I do that for a reason. As the compare pointed out in the beginning, that we have our task cut out in the times of pandemic. Unlike physical face-to-face seminar or a conference that we were so used to before the COVID-19 crisis. I think the day of the conference was devoted whole soul with absolute focus only on the goings on in the conference. But now, like I think all of us who have joined this afternoon on this virtual platform would already have had a hectic day, because I'm sure most of us would have taken their classes, their online classes, also done a bit of administrative work, this and that. You know, there are so many requirements these days with online exams of our universities going on. So I'm sure, you know, on a day where, unlike a conference day, a webinar or a virtual coming together actually is to pack in a lot of effort and to give in a lot of time. First of all, a big thank you to the organizers, to the principal of Dr.Babasaheb, Ambedkar, Mahavidyalaya, Amravati, Dr. Sahib. Thank you also to the management and the convener, Dr. Varsha Gawande, and the organizing secretary, Dr. Kamble. I can see one request, as the organizers have been time and again, instructing the participants to to mute out and to keep their cameras switched off, because that only, disrupts, and that likely is to evoke a lot of protest from the organizers and the speakers themselves. So on a webinar on the theme of protest, the last thing you want is the organizers and the speakers to protest or the participants to disrupt. So let's take the next 1 hour on an even keel where everyone follows certain protocols. And this is again one of the game changers that have taken place in conferences where we are meeting virtually, and that is our internet protocols have become more important than the formal protocols. And so I request the participants to keep themselves mute. Once again, in a very paradoxical way, a webinar on the theme of protest cannot and should not mute anybody. But I suppose we will give the participants, I'm sure the organizers have given some time after my talk for an interaction, for a Q&A session.
Yes, sir, I agree with you.
Yeah, so where the voices of the participants need to be heard. Friends, I'll quickly jump into my talk, and I have the topic of my talk today is issues of representation in times of conflict, the literature of protest. What I will place before you is to problematize the very concept of protest in the webinar theme. By that I mean, I wish to show to you that protest in resistance, subversive, or oppositional writing does not have a singular univocal meaning. On the contrary, and this is the chief premise of my argument, the argument that I will place before you in my talk, my chief premise is that the term protest that defines a particular genre of writing is actually multivalent, it is contingent, and it is often expedient as well. Professor Kamble was talking about how the literature of protest takes on or assumes different forms depending upon the location of the protest writer. And in a sense, he hit the nail on its head by drawing our attention to the fact that it is in the very nature of protest literature that its modes and strategies of resistance are determined by the location, by the place and time of the event or the crisis that produces it in the first instance. So in other words, what I'm suggesting is that to talk about protest literature or to refer to a tradition of radical dissenting literature is to open the field to several contesting and contravening issues of representation. Friends, in my talk, I like to focus on three important issues because, as my title suggests, it's issues of representation that will be the focus of my talk. So I like to look at three important issues of representation in relation to the literature of protest. The first issue that I'll walk you through my talk is to raise this question, or rather to engage with this question, that what are the ethics and politics involved when writers recover or recuperate texts of protest from the past to challenge and critique events of violence, events of atrocity in the present. So the first issue which I would like to put forth before you involving the literature of protest is that when writers go back to the past and recuperate literatures of just the nature and the form of the engagement with protest literature of the past, and how is it relevant or how is it appropriated in order to determine the reality of the present. The second issue that I would like to engage with, that I would like to address is that, what and how do writers, for example, how do writers create writings of protest in the face of atrocities that by its very nature are unimaginable, unthinkable, incomprehensible? And finally, the final issue is, what is the nature of discourse produced when an atrocious event, when a cataclysmic event triggers responses of protest from writers belonging to different affiliations to different locations, affiliations to race, to different race, caste, ethnicity, class, or writers coming from different regions and nationalities, or writers professing to different ideologies. In other words, what happens when one form of protest to a violent event or an unjust action incites other forms of protest? In other words, the question that I would like to address as the third issue of representation of protest literature is, what happens when protest leads to counter-protest? What happens when protest leads to counter-protest? I'd like to share my screen with you now.
We can see your screen, sir.
Thank you. So should I go ahead?
Yes, yes.
Fine. Friends, the year 1819 in English literary history is a remarkable year. I mean, this is the year was witness to the infamous, what is called the infamous Peterloo massacre, not the Waterloo. The Peterloo massacre, cavalry charged into a crowd of representation. And so Shelley penned what many of us would have read and taught, The Mask of Anarchy, a poem in which Shelley advocated a radical social action and non-violent resistance. And those very famous lines from The Mask of Anarchy that you see on your slide, where Shelley exhorts crowds, the protesters, to shake your chains to earth like dew, which in sleep had fallen on you. Ye are many, they are few. So what Shelley was doing in this Mask of Anarchy was to warn the adoring multitudes from turning into a violent mob. And he was at the same time cautioning them from falling prey to the spirit of anarchy. And besides exhorting the masses to raise their voice against what he believed was undemocratic and unconstitutional, that is the monarchy, Shelley was also in this prophetic poem, Shelley was also denouncing slavery and the postponement, particularly the postponement of the abolition of slavery by Britain and other European powers. So he was trying to galvanize the masses to insurgent thought, but non-violent political action against the monarchy or against the British government, the then monarchy and the then British government. So, in his poetry, Shelley has often been accused, and none other than Matthew Arnold, of being an ineffectual angel beating in the void his luminous wings in vain. That's what Arnold accused him of. But not only from Mask of Anarchy, but many of his other poems, including Ode to the West Wind, Shelley was never an ineffectual angel. And in fact, like he was more like the west wind, the trumpet of a prophecy, a destroyer of false beliefs and fake institutions, and a preserver of truth, equality, and justice. So Shelley's poetry is truly, it embodies, it epitomizes the romantic poetry of protest. And I'm reminded here of what the great Palestinian national poet Mahmoud Darwish said, that, he said that every beautiful poem is an act of resistance. Shelley regarded poets and said that poets are the unacknowledged legislators of the world. Then surely poets are also the unacknowledged lawbreakers, lawbreakers of the world. To try and define the contours of protest literature can be an extremely challenging one, but I find, this particular definition by John Stauffer, taken from his foreword to American protest literature, highlighting the main features of protest literature. And the definition is there, but from the definition of protest literature, as defined by John Stauffer, what comes across clearly is that protest literature basically espouses protest explicitly, either as a major theme, a recurrent, or a structuring device in its narrative literature. I feel that protest literature is one which can be defined, which can be quickly characterized by a couple of tropes. And that is one, it is characterized by radical ideas. It is characterized by a strong moral conviction. It adopts a strident tone. It has a pronounced sense of outrage. I mean, protest literature is born out of a sense of outrage, of anger. It calls for action, immediate, radical action. And most importantly, it usually is, it embodies or it reinforces an optimistic belief in the ultimate triumph of justice. This, friends, is what protest literature is. So regardless of difference of culture, time, and place, all protest literature also have three major functions or three major roles. And I like to state them in this manner. One, all protest literature seek to testify. Many protest literature are in the form of testimonial narratives. Second, all protest literature, the purpose of protest literature is to indict, to bring the perpetrators of injustice and violence or exploitation to book. And finally, all protest literature also seeks redress, it seeks reparation, it seeks repatriation. So in testifying, protest literature consciously aims to remember, to commemorate acts of injustice perpetrated against, whether it is against particular persons, particular groups, or particular communities. And therefore, protest is, protest is against any unjust act that may be committed in the guise of racism or casteism or gender discrimination or social and class divisions. And this is the marker of protest literature, that in the act of testifying the suffering of people, protest literature honors those who have endured, and it enables future generations. It enables future generations to remember and to understand their own history and culture. So protest literature is not just a narrative of resistance, of subversion, but it is a part of history. It historicizes the suffering, atrocity, as well as the response to suffering. It is also an act of indictment. That itself is its compelling motive, because in doing so, it seeks to expose those who are guilty of acts of oppression, acts of injustice. Protest literature in indicting injustice, it seeks to identify and record the act. It is the defining quality of protest literature to symbolically and literally name injustice and its perpetrators. And finally, in seeking redress, protest literature aims to end the injustice it exposes, as well as secure punishment of perpetrators and provide, as I said, restitution or reparation to the victims. One definition, or rather among the many definitions of protest literature, I found a very unique definition of protest literature by none other than Amit Chaudhary, the famous Indian novelist. He has an interesting take on what is protest literature. And he points out that protest is inscribed, he says, and I quote, he says, protest is inscribed in the very idea of the literary, which in its resistance to interpretation is a peculiar species of dissent. In other words, what Amit Chaudhary is probably meaning is that it is in the very nature of literature, it is what we call the literariness of writing, of literature, that refuses univocal single absolute meanings or single interpretation, that gives to it a streak of protest. Because literature refuses to be interpreted in a singular univocal fashion, because literature opens up to multivalent, ambiguous and ambivalent interpretations, it is in its very literariness, therefore, that literature allows protest to come into play. Friends, the expression of protest through literature can assume many literary forms. Sometimes, protest and dissent may sometimes take the form of individual acts. Protest can take the form of individual acts, such as Thoreau's, essay on civil disobedience, where he wrote this essay in order to protest against slavery by refusing to pay the tax. Or protest or dissent can also be the expression of collective anguish and resistance on the ground, like the recitation of Faiz Ahmed Faiz Hum Dekhenge in many parts of the country today. So one final point before I take up these issues, the three issues of protest literature, and that is, it's important to realize that protest and dissent do not always have to be an instrument for revolutionary change. It may simply be to testify what Edward Said called something beyond the reach of dominating systems. Something beyond the reach of dominating systems. I'll give you an example. And this example is related to the first issue of representation of protest in literary texts in Sarajevo. The issue that, let me remind you, the issue that I'm connecting this example is to what are the ethics and politics involved when writers recover texts from the past to challenge and critique violence and atrocity in the present. And this is an example of this issue. In July 1993, at the height of the Serbian-Bosnian conflict, a conflict that went on for nearly 5 to 7 years, Susan Sontag, the celebrated feminist writer and thinker, staged a production of Waiting for Godot in the Serbian militia. And you can see on the right side, on the right image on the slide is with Susan Sontag and her production team. At that time, Sarajevo was going through the longest siege in recorded history, and one also rare in the use of brutal force and extreme violence, because after all, people in Sarajevo were caught in the fray of a rabid nationalism and ethnic politics. Now, what is interesting is the reason that, why Sontag chose to bring this play from the US to the war-torn or embattled city of Sarajevo. And the choice of the play, friends, was not accidental at all. In an essay that she wrote and published in the New York Review of Books, an essay that she titled Godot Comes to Sarajevo, Sontag described her experience about the production of the play in war-torn Sarajevo. And in the essay, she states, and I quote, that Beckett Waiting for Godot was a metaphor for miracle. So in a sense, I wonder what is the connection that Sontag saw between Sarajevo during the war in the 1990s and Beckett's play written so far back in time in 1953. Perhaps Sontag saw that the characters waiting for Godot in the play symbolically captured the state of mind of nearly 4 lakh people in Sarajevo waiting like Godot. In fact, once again in an interview, she recalled after she was asked if her choice of bringing Godot to Sarajevo was too pessimistic or depressing for the people, given the fact that the people were caught in the war-like situation. She replied that such thinking was irrelevant because she said, that the representation of despair in literature or in the form of play cannot ever be redundant when people themselves are really in despair. So to bring a play which apparently highlights despair cannot be the reason for not staging the play. Even a play of despair and hopelessness can give solace and hope to conflict. What she also pointed that culture, she said, is an expression, after all, of human dignity. And this is what the people in Sarajevo felt that they had lost.
Hello? Hello, sir? Hello? Dr. Banerjee, sir? We are not being able to connect with you.
Why disturbance is that?
Hello? Dr. Banerjee?
I don't know. I pressed it.
Participants, please bear with us. There is a technical problem. We are calling Honorable Dr. Banerjee.
I think he will connect. we'll
Yes,
just wait
yes,
for
sir.
some time. Yeah, he will come.
Yeah.
Hello, sir.
I think there's a net problem.
Yeah, network connection problem.
Yes.
Just wait for some time.
Okay.
Yeah, he's joining once more, sir. Sorry for the flaws in the technical. After the second plenary session, we will continue with the question answer session with, of course, Honorable Dr. Rahul Kamble and Dr. Pratik Banerjee. So participants, please be with us.
तुम दोगे उसी में मिक्स करके दूंगी ना, कम पड़ जाते हैं उसको, कितना हुआ उसका बिल?
Yeah, am I audible?
Yes, sir. Please continue.
And I think I'll have to share my screen again.
Okay. Yeah.
Just give me a minute. Is my screen visible now?
Yes, it's visible, sir.
All right.
Please go ahead.
Fine. So what I was trying to, give or rather bring foreground by way of this example of Susan Sontag and her production of Godot in Sarajevo. What I find interesting about this case is the number of narratives that generated a veritable discourse around the production of Godot. For example, the arrival of a celebrity writer in the middle of war zone in Europe, the city of Sarajevo itself known for its rich cultural heritage, cultural history, Sontag's decision to stage Beckett's absurdist and existential play, the time in which this event was located or situated, and the citizens themselves fighting to save their lives and preserving their dignity. So you can see that there were a plethora of narratives that together made the entire discourse of the literature of the past as a... So all these aspects intermeshed with each other, multiple interpretations and varied reception. Friends, I give you this example because I believe that the case of Sontag gives testimony to the fact that literature from the past has often been recurrent. Indeed, I mean, if you look at protest literature, it has, the history of protest literature, it has taken many forms in, writers from Herodotus and Pliny to Camus and Brecht. All have made daring use of both traditional forms and established genres. They also have invented radical and experimental modes of writing in order to articulate dissent, in order to raise resistance against injustice. And once again, let me re-emphasize that my focus of my talk is more on modes of resistance, the narrative techniques and the peculiar literary forms that have been generated by protest to an atrocity or to an unjust event. So we have any number of examples here where protest literature has found imaginative expression, like war writings, Holocaust writings or Holocaust literature, partition women's writings, Dalit literature, Adivasi testimony. The cumulative effect, many of these writings have employed and paradox. They have created what we call the anti-hero, the properties of a plot perspective. So the literature of self makes a protest or voices dissent against the traditional framework of what we assume to be a literary form. Take, for example, Take, for example, Norman Mailer's The Armies of the Night. I mean, this was published, Mailer published this text in 1968, and it won the Pulitzer Prize. Nation of Mailer's book as a book of protest, but in the non-fiction category, itself generated a lot of controversy. I mean, this was because Mailer was inventing a new style of fiction writing, a new mode of fiction writing, where he combined journalistic style with the narrative technique of fiction. So, you know, using the realism of journalism with his unique, tried to capture the mood and action of anti-Vietnam War protests or protesters who were, which culminated in the march of thousands of supporters, anti-war protesters to Pentagon, Washington in the summer of 1967. So here is an example where a massive public demonstration to an ongoing movement as protest against war, the Vietnam War specifically, inaugurated a new kind of protest writing, which Mailer himself called non-fiction novel. Non-fiction novel. And therefore, you know, taking liberties, like Norman Mailer, taking liberties with the realistic mode of storytelling has often been a writer's narrative strategy to devise an uncommon method for capturing something uncommonly wrong happening in society. So writers have realism in order of twist them in fantastic situations of being perpetrated in society. Think, for example, Joe Saramago's, Pulitzer Prize-winning Blindness, the novel Blindness that came out in 1995. It's a searing work about an undefined time when citizens of an unnamed city succumb to a freak epidemic, like the pandemic, but a freak epidemic of global blindness. Or take William Golding's Lord of the Flies, which tells the story of how a seemingly innocent group of boys, when they find themselves castaways on an island, how they turn into cruel cutthroats. Or Colson, more contemporary, Colson Whitehead's The Underground Railroad, in which a subterranean science fiction plot erupts into an account of slavery, erupts into a protest against slavery. In Blindness, for example, Saramago uses a quotation from the Book of Exhortations, and he uses it as an epitaph or an epigram to his novel. And he says, the quote at the bottom of your slide, "If you can see, look. If you can look, observe. And if you observe, then don't be silent." I mean, this quotation indicates the political and philosophical intention of Saramago in his novel Blindness. Because much like Camus' Plague and Kafka's Trial, Saramago's novel also is an allegory on the indifference and cruelty of the state, the capacity of individuals to do violence to each other, and the loss and recovery of basic humanity. His purpose in writing a novel on blindness was to open our eyes, or rather the eyes of the Portuguese people, to the harsh and brutal reality of a very totalitarian and autocratic government. This is another example which perhaps most of us would know and identify with. Consider this again as an interesting example of how protest literature being appropriated and brought to the vanguard of a liberationary movement in the present. You know, Atwood's Handmaid's Tale was written in 1984, a year that should ring a lot of bells. Coincidentally, much like George Orwell's 1984, so she published this novel in 1984, and we all know, many of us who have read the novel or seen the teleseries, or rather the Netflix series, Atwood tells the story of a religious revolution in the US called Gilead, where women are stripped, and the tale which is set in the distant future is one where birth rates have declined dramatically in America due to some environmental disaster, and women have been made the property of the state. Friends, the book, as I said, was written in 1984, but it was recalled in the 1990s by
Hello? Honorable Dr. Banerjee, sir, we are unable to hear you.
feminist groups in the US, who were protesting against the
So I think once more, we are dealing with the internet problem.
No, I'm back. Like Arnold Schwarzenegger, I'm back.
Okay.
All right. But I think I'll have to share my screen again.
Yes. Yes.
This is the this is the problem of virtual platforms. But I guess we have to live through, just as we are trying to live through the pandemic, we'll have to live through this digital problem as well. Is it visible now?
Yes, sir, it's visible.
Is my screen visible?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Fine. So coming back to, I was giving you the example of Atwood's fiction again, particularly The Handmaid's Tale. And this was feminist movements in the 1990s appropriated Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale. And what you see on your slide are these women protesters who appeared on the streets of several cities in the US, including Washington. They dressed themselves in the crimson robes and the white bonnets, as you can see, in order to, with placards reading, "Make Margaret Atwood fiction again." So this sort of sartorial, this protest in the form of a sartorial symbolism was, where activists, for example, feminist activists, borrowed from Atwood's novel and used it in their protest, gained a lot of gain for the movement, a lot of publicity, and a lot of public support. So it's interesting, therefore, that in appropriating the handmaid's dress code from a dystopian story, the protesters were highlighting the draconian nature of the US government's policies against women's, women's reproductive rights. Well, maybe we'll skip this. Margaret Atwood herself was asked about whether she, what was her comment, what was her reaction to the use of her 1984 novel in a present in a present feminist movement. This is what she said. She said, why is The Handmaid's Tale interesting and important? Because women are interesting and important in real life. They are not an afterthought of nature. They are not secondary players in human destiny, and every society has always known that. And then she was talking about the relevance of a novel written 3 decades back in the age of Trump, or also the age of post that Trump was elected then. Literary works such as Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale, as well as George Orwell's 1984, have become much in demand. And readers have Irish totalitarian society in 1984 with the current political climate. Well, even as November approaches and Trump is seeking a re-election, such kind of protest literature, people will keep on going back to protest literature of the past in order to voice dissent, in order to articulate their dissent with Trump politics. This is the second issue that I was talking about. That what or how do writers create writings of protest in the face of atrocities that are unimaginable and incomprehensible? I mean, what can writers do when faced with an act of terrorism? An act of terrorism which has world-altering consequences. How do writers exercise their imagination to capture that which is unimaginable, that which is unrepresentable? Do writers, the question, do writers like political hawks and media predators, do they succumb to chest-thumping patriotism and warmongering hysteria? Or can writers strike a balance between outrage and plain humaneness in order to convey protest against acts of terrorism? Friends, it is said that the world changed after 9/11. It is also said that literature changed after 9/11. And we know, in the 2 decades that have gone by since the day of September in 2001, ground zero and an intense imaginative response from writers, both from the global north as well as the global south. Writers, a host of writers, both popular writers like Don DeLillo and Martin Amis, Anglo-American writers, have written with taking 9/11 as the backdrop of their narratives. And 9/11 has also evoked the use of this event as a literary backdrop, as a narrative backdrop in the writings. So writers from different locations and with different political affiliations have reacted to what has been called the defining moment of the century so far, which of course has been proven wrong by the ongoing pandemic, because surely nothing in scale and magnitude the word ever should now be deleted from our vocabulary, can be replicated as the ongoing crisis. The point is, interestingly, more than 9/11 and its aftermath has produced more than a substantial body of writings, a corpus of work of nearly 140 novels. And the issue of representation, of protest against 9/11 or an act of terrorism has been to ask whether, how does one write about, how do writers even protest when the language itself has suffered linguistic violence due to a catastrophic event? Because, when a conflict of terrible proportion happens, not only does it alter the reality of the time, but it also makes enormous demands on language. Language has to be stretched to accommodate a new reality. A new language has to be created to reflect a new condition. So, for instance, September 11 attacks, the act of terrorism, made writers ask, what verb should one use for parking a plane in a building? And the British novelist Martin Amis commented after 9/11, he said, I think every writer on earth was considering a change of occupation on September 12th, because what you had to say seemed to be dwarfed by events. So the central question I'm asking from such responses by writers, can atrocity silence protest? It was Theodor Adorno who said that to write poetry after Auschwitz would be barbaric. But nevertheless, writers have refused to canonize silence and have written. Often in their writings, their purpose has been to challenge, to resist, and to subvert the official truth or the media version. And in doing so, they have produced the literature of protest and dissent. Because after all, no one wants war, trauma, or terror to be misrepresented, to be politicized, to be co-opted, or to be distorted. And so to place literature within the political and cultural context of any historical conflict is to examine the relationship between politics and protest, between history and narrative. What is noteworthy? What is noteworthy is that protest against terrorism, protest against violence of terrorism generated a multiplicity of discourses. I mean, it produced a dichotomizing discourse, a discourse that generated a binary between us versus them, the West versus the East, the liberal West versus the fundamentalist East. So on the one hand, in the aftermath of the September 11 terrorist attacks, there was a spontaneous expression of sympathy with the victims and the tendency to side with the United States in its art. On the other, there was a tendency to label and stigmatize as the enemy, and as if to get them of vengeance. So the official rhetoric post 9/11 took on, it took on the shape of an ugly, flag-waving, hyper-nationalist response. Remember George Bush's famous us or you are against us. You are either with us or with the enemy. Generated by acts of terror,
Asked to unmute. Okay. I think as before, Honorable Dr. Banerjee sir will be back soon with us. A very interesting topic is going on, but there's no option to the technical problems that we are facing. Participants, I do apologize for this glitch. We are just about to call Honorable Dr. Banerjee, and I think he will reconnect with us soon. So today we have another definition of protest literature. That is very new. At least to me, it's new. Dr. Banerjee has given us a definition, a very simple definition of protest literature, where he says that protest literature simply is to testify something beyond the reach of dominating system. And yes, it's so true. Though it's simple, it's very true. And it has to be implemented.
Sir is back.
Hello, sir. Honorable
Yeah.
Dr. Babasah.
Yeah, I'm back again.
Okay.
Right. So I was about to come to the final leg of my talk. Let's keep our fingers crossed. And, let me share the screen again with you.
Yes, yes.
Is my screen visible?
Yes, yes, sir. It's visible.
Okay. So, you know, I was talking about the third issue of representation, where a political event or a political crisis, such as an act of terrorism, generates a discourse which is dichotomizing, which divides and separates writers belonging to different locations and different political affiliations. We don't have exactly time, but you know, on your slide, there were two responses. One was by Art Spiegelman, the famous graphic artist, who in the New York Times, right after 9/11 happened, produced a series of 10 broadsheets. And as you can see on the screen, the dichotomy between us versus them is played out between George Bush, the figure of George Bush with the American Stars and Stripes, holding the Stars and Stripes, and Osama, of course, holding a scimitar. But then what is interesting is the tagline at the bottom of the galley, which says that we were terrorized, where Spiegelman, as the speaker, says that we were terrorized equally by Al-Qaeda as well as by our own government. On the other side, on the right side, you have another, Mohsin Hamid writing in response to a number of 9/11 fiction written by prominent American writers like Don DeLillo, for example, writing a novel which has now been adapted and made famous by the Meera Nair film, The Reluctant Fundamentalist. Why I'm bringing these examples of what we would call different forms of protest is to suggest that, that the dichotomizing discourse that an act of terrorism brought forth was basically to place the West as the center of secularism versus an Islamic fanaticism. So, and instead of therefore protests being uniform, protests being of the same nature, here we had writers producing literature which, in its own ideology and its perspective, opposed each other, countered each other. This I leave for my participants perhaps to read up. We don't have, I'm running a little short of time now. One interesting short story written by Martin Amis in response to 9/11 was a short story called The Last Days of Muhammad Atta. And what is interesting is not the story, because the story is written from the point of view of the terrorist as the other. But if you Google, what is interesting is that this particular short story written by Martin Amis generated a heated controversy, a heated response from our own Pankaj Mishra, who alleged that Martin Amis was in fact playing up, this binary between the West and the East, and he himself was being guilty of racial and religious prejudice and fundamentalism. One remembers, therefore, if we look at the kind of politics that has been generated by the literature of protest, then perhaps I take you back in time again to a politics that is played out on a poem that we all are familiar with, and that is The Mending Wall, Robert Frost's The Mending Wall. And the images on your screen, the top slide shows John F. Kennedy, for example. John F. Kennedy in 1962 was invited by the then divided West Berlin. Germany was then West and East. And standing against the backdrop of the Berlin Wall, John F. Kennedy gave an inspiring speech where he quoted Frost, and he said, "Something there is that doesn't love a wall." And that became a kind of a rallying cry of the West Berliners to down with the wall. So Kennedy quoted Robert Frost from The Mending Wall, saying, "Something there is that doesn't love a wall." Again, in a fascinating story of politics being played at the height of the Cold War, politics being played out by nation states over a poem by Robert Frost, President Khrushchev of the then Soviet Union, when he heard that John F. Kennedy had quoted this line from Robert Frost's poem, in a broadcast the next day, he went on air and quoted Robert Frost from Mending Wall, the line, good fences make good neighbors." Friends, literature as protest to acts of terrorism or acts of any brutal atrocity is important because it allows alternative responses. And fiction is not only adequate to make sense of the world, but it also provides the healing touch to trauma, to violence, to terror. And there is this interesting analogy made by the American novelist Don DeLillo. In a pre-9/11 novel called Mao 2, written in 1991, he makes this comparison. And the comparison is, he says, there's a curious knot that binds novelists and terrorists. Years ago, I used to think it was possible for a novelist to alter the inner life of the culture. Now, bomb makers and government have taken that territory. They make raids on human consciousness. What writers used to do before are now being done by terrorists. I find this a striking comparison and a very unusual one, but nevertheless an appropriate comparison, because both literature, if you think about it, both literature and terrorism target the inner life of human consciousness. Like a work of literature, terrorism is a public act that defines its success or its failure by its ability to penetrate into the private sphere. So if novelists, according to Don DeLillo, if novelists are in competition with terrorists for the power to shape our consciousness, then the response of the writer, today's writer, cannot be to retreat into a pure private experience and relinquish, and relinquish the public role of the writer. So rather, the writer of today must become something of a photojournalist. He must occupy the space of danger and meet terrorism on its own terrain. A terrain in which you might say public events and private narratives intersect, in which the writer must imagine alternative responses to any violent act. So literature then becomes the site for exploring the intersection between the public and the private. And this is where communitarian, what Dr. Kamble referred to, communitarian or collective protests come into play. Friends, can we have a democratic society without a democratic imagination? I wrap up my talk by quoting Arundhati Roy. It is she who said that the only thing worth globalizing is dissent. And it can be argued that literature in its very essence its very purpose is to raise questions questions about unacceptable answers. Because it dismantles, literature of protest dismantles beliefs, it dismantles conventions, and therefore its role, the purpose of literature is not merely mimetic, but literature, the purpose of literature is to act as a disruptive force. Because the aim of literature is to question the givenness of anything that is passed as truth. As Auden says, all I have is a voice to undo the folded line. And consequently, literature holds the ability to incite a change in thought. It is this literature which changes thought, which can then bring about a change through action in society. I started my talk by quoting Mahmoud Darwish. Every beautiful poem is an act of resistance. And therefore, wherever there is oppression, there will be resistance. Wherever there is violence and injustice, there will be writings of protest. And whenever such writings emerge, friends, there will be hope for a better world. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, sir. In spite of the technical glitches, you were connected to us and you enlightened us in this perpetuous event on a very wonderful topic. I really feel privileged to have the pleasant task of thanking you on behalf of my college and my trust. In the beginning of your lecture, your verbal protest about the internet protocol, I think, sir, we all agree, because nowadays we have become netizens than just merely being citizens. So as netizens, yes, I think we have to follow the internet protocol. The line that you quoted from P.B. Shelley's poem, the one I liked the most was, "Rise like lions after slumber." It reminds me of Rabindranath Tagore's poem, which is very familiar to every one of us, where the mind is without fear. Especially, I quote, "Where the mind is without fear and the head is held high. Into that heaven of freedom, my Father, let my country awake." And if this goes on, sir, I think there will be no literature of protest, no protest in actual terms. If there is one religion of humanity, and as you said, that protest literature simply means something beyond the search of dominating system. Yes, a very simple definition, but it's so true. And it should be practiced today, I feel. Thank you so much, sir, for enlightening us today. So, dear participants, before going to the valedictory session, I think we should make open this session for the question answer hour. The forum is open for the participants, and you may please go ahead with your questions to Honorable Dr. Pratik Banerjee, sir, and to Honorable Dr. Kamble, sir. Participants may raise their hand and directly ask the questions. Okay, Dr. Satyendra Gadpaile.
Yes, madam. Good afternoon to you.
Very good afternoon, sir.
Yes, of course. I have some very much, I do say, grave question for the respected dignitaries. Either Kamble sir or Pratik Banerjee sir may give the answer. Sir, just I would like to tell you that since many centuries or maybe a millennia, there is the literature of protest, and particularly maybe in the 20th century and in the last some decades, we have very, say, the literature of protest the consistently that literature of protest is coming forth, but still particularly maybe in the last half a decade, particularly if we take in the context of India, the molestation suppressions on a certain community are very much increasing. So do you think the recently that Manisha Valmiki's case, or say the very ridiculous type of comment given by our governor of Maharashtra, Koshari, that the person who would learn Sanskrit, maybe that he would become a gentleman. So, what do you think, particularly in the context of India, why such so distorted things are being happened with the and particularly with the minors? Uh, so that is my question, because there may be many dimensions to this question. In Kashmir also we had seen that some 8-year Muslim girl was very brutally raped by the Hindu fundamentalists. And there now recently Manisha Valmiki is very much, and then we had seen the Khairlanji type of massacre. So what do you think? What are your reflections? Are they, is this literature not enough to bring the change? Is there any the need of strong political organization or what? Over to you, sir.
I'll request Dr. Kamble, he was the first speaker to take this question.
See, how I look at it is, literature is one of the aspects. Literature is one of the discourses which tries to shape, which tries to influence, which tries to train people in their responses. I mean, how you look at reality, whether you are sensitized, whether literature sensitizes you, whether literature makes you aware and all. And as I said earlier, it's also a negotiating act. A writer looks at the situation and tries to create a poetics. He or she aims at, this literature will strike at the consciousness of people. So basically, literature or the writer is equipped in one of the aspects. I mean, we have to look at, like, when you're talking about the rape incidents or the abuse or, perpetration in an organized manner, for example, we also need to look into the state, its role, the police and other agencies, their role, the law, the judiciary, the social activism, right? And then many other aspects. I mean, we generally go to culture and this, that, and all. So writer is one of the elements who at the most can strike at the consciousness, which can be also looked in two ways. One is, this can be also very strong if people take this, in terms of the conscience. If people's conscience is alive, this kind of criticism or poetics will be able to reform. But if people have lost their conscience in the jingoism or many other things, we are actually facing a chaos. Today, I mean, there are so many voices struggling together to put themselves, in front of you or in your mind and all. Where is the conscience then? So writer is equipped basically to actually prick the conscience, and that is, that is he or she can do the most. As I said, if on one side, if the social, conscience is alive, ticking, and can take this, prick and reform, or whether the society has buried the conscience en masse. Basically, that is the question. Literature of protest will always be produced. We have seen, I mean, there are instances, historical instances, as Sir has mentioned, 9/11, and in response to that, you have a huge production of literature. It's basically a response, multiple responses to multiple voices coming in. that creates a discourse. So Khairlanji has created, a huge literature. I'll give, if you go to African American literature, for example, Emmett Till, and they actually formed Emmett Till Society. This boy, 14 years old boy who was, that Mississippi, when he went down and, he was lynched. So Rosa Parks, for example. So you have a huge literary response to it, basically to prick the conscience of the people who are involved in it. But the question is, as always, whether the society is conscious about it, whether its conscience is alive and ticking, or it is buried in jingoism. And this question will always remain there. I hope I answered.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Thank you, sir.
I have already. Okay. There are many dimensions to this. Maybe the question itself, because I do say that perhaps literature is somewhere failure to establish a strong political organization to protest all these distortion by the fundamentalists and the ruling. The rulers. I do feel it. I don't know.
There are instances in history also where literature, there are instances in history where literature proved very dominant and could give, a proper shape or a direction to the society. But that's why I'm saying it depends on whether the society is ready or whether the society's conscience is alive and ticking or it is buried. It also reflects on the strength of the literature as well.
Thank you, sir.
So somewhere we have to also see that, where the literature fails.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you, sir.
Can I?
Somali Gupta, ma'am. Yes. Please go ahead with your question.
Thank you so much, ma'am. And my question again would be addressed both to Rahul sir and Pratik sir. I may sound a bit cynical when I look at the literature of protest and say that they are not really literatures of protest, but rather somewhere aligning with the political views that are acceptable. So we don't really see literature of protest in that way. We will not see the real issues that need to be protested against being protested in those literatures. So it all remains in the mind of the readers as to how they interpret them and how they understand them in order to make them works of protest. In fact, the 140 novels that Dr. Banerjee quoted, saying that that came up after 9/11, were they really literatures of protest, or were they just people making use of 9/11 as a popular topic to be dealt with? And it's actually finding a very interesting topic where people would really actually read it. So it is more about the writer's readability, the writer's popularity that is being leveraged upon by the writers, or are they really into protesting the social issues? What is it, sir? What is your take on that? I would like to have an answer.
Well, there are writers and there are writers, just as protest has multifarious forms. But when I said that there are 140 novels that, that 9/11 produced a huge body of work, well, I wasn't exactly classifying each one of those as protest literature. But basically what I was trying to highlight was that this entire body of work came from writers from different locations. And what was of interest for me is to find that writers, for example, like, contemporary popular writers that you mentioned, American writers like Don DeLillo himself, or John Updike, for instance, all of these writers, Jonathan Franzen, Saffron Foer, all of them were writing, were using 9/11, yes, as a narrative trope, sometimes using it either as the backdrop to their narratives. But what holds my interest here is that not of the writings themselves, but the kind of discourse that the production of this literature generated. And therein lies my contention that the literature of protest is not by itself, it may not itself be a voice of dissent, but what it participates and engages in. For example, subsequent to the 9/11, what happened was, as we all know, George Bush and the war on terror became a kind of a dichotomizing discourse between those for the West and those against. And in a sense, people started talking about the validity of Samuel Huntington's thesis, where he talked about the clash of civilization. And this trope of East versus West, Western rationality and Western modernism against Islamic fundamentalism or Arab jihadi, it's a very ancient trope. It's a trope that even Edward Said has repeatedly pointed out in his foundational works on post-colonialism and imperialism. The point is that when writers write, they do not set out to revolutionize or change the world. Some may, but not all writers do that.
Yeah.
Perhaps writers have many functions, many roles. One would be simply, one possible role that writers fundamentally do is to raise, it's a consciousness level raising of consciousness, to sensitize the readers to a situation that may not be so palpable, that may not be so evident. Remember that the best of dissident literature has actually come as protest against the most totalitarian, the most authoritarian governments. So as Vladimir Nabokov, another great dissident writer, a writer of protest, we all know how an entire array of writers from the erstwhile Soviet Union defected to the US and non-communist countries in the 60s and the 70s. The point again was that writers do not write with a political agenda. Well, sometimes one may interpret and read their perspective as fitting in, but to cubbyhole, to place writers into neat little labels saying, oh, he is an anti-establishment and the other is pro-establishment, I think is to denigrate, to pull back the fundamental reason why writers write. The fundamental reason that writers write is to raise, not just to raise, but to ensure that they convey their voices, not as messages, but to convey their voices through their imagination onto the readers.
Right. Thank you, sir. Yes, sir.
I would like to add what Somali said, is that, for example, there is a protest against the literature of protest. We can look at it from the Anthropocene perspective, like, think about the environment, the crisis. Can the literature be really in a position to change it or change the direction? So there are people who ask the question, what is the point in writing a novel about environment, this, that, and all? Because at the end of the day, you will be writing and somebody will be reading. Nobody would be going actually and doing something to really protect or undo what has been done to it. So there are people who are protesting, against the literature of protest or, concern or, consciousness also. There is a line like that, as you said.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for bringing that up. I don't mean to say that it is futile or that it does not have a value. My question here only was that are the writers also selective about picking up what they want to write about? But as Pratik sir said that, yes, I do remember the Russian literature, which of course was greatly revolutionizing in its own way, raising the consciousness to a level where it did play an integral role, an important role in the whole revolution itself. So thank you. I think I need to read up a little more and maybe think about it a little more. But thank you for bringing those thoughts up, which continue to make me more intrigued about protest literature and look at more works
Thank you for raising good questions.
Thank you.
Thank you. And ma'am, I just want to tell you that literature is incomplete without historical background.
Yes, of course.
So it always goes in hand. And so, as you said, that do the writers get stimulated by these events? I think that everything that we do in our life has a motivation behind it.
Absolutely.
Yes. People might be going for motivation or stimulation from the events, and then they can write such flawless books and novels that not only entertain us, but yes, that gives.
I don't agree about the flawless part. I don't agree about the flawless part, but I do agree about me being cynical about some of the writings that I go through.
But yeah, good question, ma'am, and a wonderful explanation from our resource person. Thank you so much, Honorable Dr. Banerjee, sir, and Honorable Dr. Kamble, sir. And we go for the next question by Dr. Jagruti Vyas.
Hello, ma'am. Hello, sir. Actually, I would say that my question has already been answered. I was also thinking on the same lines on which Somali madam was thinking, that if we see the historical background, then it was really very authentic when Russian Revolution took place or French Revolution and all that. But today, if we consider the modern context, then what I feel is that protest just for the sake of protest is being done, and no any desired output is seen out of it. So already sir has explained it, but if he can throw some more light on it, I would be glad. Pratik Banerjee sir, as his speech has already been very enlightening. So if he can throw some more light on this, that why is this particular trend has entered in literature?
Protest for the sake of protest. Well, yeah. I mean, if you think of, especially if you're thinking about the use of social media as platforms to protest, to raise voices, to articulate dissent, well, there is a tendency these days to take protest and dissent on the social media without turning it into a meaningful political action. I think one of the many things that have happened in recent times is whether we are talking about the Arab Spring Revolution or whether we are talking about the Wall Street occupation. Protests have taken diverse forms. One has to recognize that protests that we were talking about during the Cold War, protest literature or dissident literature, or even anarchist literature in the 60s and the 70s, were extremely relevant and appropriate during those times. As times move ahead, protest literature in the new millennium will also, like the literature of the past, will take on new forms. And I can even, we started today's webinar on the note of what the pandemic is doing to us. And I liked Shubhodhan madam saying that perhaps in the context of the pandemic, is nature protesting? Is there a rallying cry of nature itself protesting against this reckless exploitation of environment? Well, I'm sure every age or every decade, for example, has produced a crisis of its own. And every single crisis, great crisis always produces great literature. And a part of that great literature is what we call protest literature. So sometimes we ourselves need to be open and receptive about the diverse forms in which what we think protest literature to be in the past has changed. And therefore we ourselves need to redefine, reinvent, and reconfigure our notions of what protest literature is. Protest literature in popular arts, for example, has become almost, whether it is a street play or whether it is protest through films or documentaries or protest through posters, virtual posters I'm talking about, or memes, for instance, memes in the social media, is also a part of protest literature. So our notion of what is literature itself needs to be altered and modified.
I just like to add one line here. Actually, he has explained it. But it's a valid question that, just because it is a protest literature and, then we should accept it, or just like any other literature, protest literature is also subject to its, it has to also qualify, and it also receive the criticism and all. That's why I added at the beginning the line that if we look at the protest literature only in terms of, or exclusively in terms of protest, we may miss the core value of the literature there. I mean, in that kind of literature is whether it educates people of the situations, whether it sets the terms properly and what they are protesting, why they are protesting and all like that. So whether it educates people and whether it equips people to negotiate. Now the literature of protest which qualifies these things, things about the change and all, well and good. Otherwise it will be, as Jagrati said, like, protest for protest sake.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, sir, for explaining it so beautifully. I think we need a span of time to pass over this literature to understand its true value.
True.
Maybe
True,
in future.
Jagrati. Yeah.
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 Yes,
Yeah.
and I agree.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. And sir, we have a question from YouTube. Yaha Ali. His question is, what is the critical relationship between waiting for Godot and Swarajkas? It's for you, Honorable Dr. Banerjee, sir.
I didn't quite get the question.
I'll just repeat. What is the critical relationship between waiting for Godot and Swarajkus?
I'm not sure whether I followed the second word.
Yeah, sir, even I am a bit confused. Syracuse.
The question beats me. I'm sorry.
Just a minute, sir. Sarajevo.
Sarajevo.
Okay.
Sarajevo. Okay. All right.
The spelling, yeah. They misspelled it, sir. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. All right. Well, I thought I was trying to actually bring the correlation where Sontag, as I said, was bringing this production of Waiting for Godot, and the connection that she herself, the answer that she gave to questions by journalists as to what's the reason that she brought this play, this existential play, is to suggest that, that the correlation may not be an obvious and a direct one, but it is to suggest that just as the characters in Waiting for Godot look up for redemption and hope, and in the process of waiting, people say that it is a nihilistic play, but there is an interpretation. There are any number of interpretations to suggest that it's not entirely a play of despair and hopelessness, but a play of hope and redemption. So the waiting itself, the correlation between Sarajevo and Waiting for Godot is that here we had, an entire nearly 3 to 4 lakh people in a besieged city, waiting not passively, but waiting for the world, for the world's conscience to be shaken up. And here was therefore a feminist writer and a playwright herself who brings a production from the past in order to raise the conscience. And mind you, the slide that I showed, the production, Sontag produced these plays not by a cast of actors brought from the US. In fact, all the actors were local people. And people, therefore, what Sontag was saying was that it is art that brings, when people participate in making art, whether it is a play, for example, like Waiting for Godot, in the process of making art itself provides a sort of a catharsis. It provides redemption. It provides solace to people caught in a warlike situation. So in times of conflict, think about what you and I did at the start of the pandemic. I mean, we went back to literature and read the text, the novels and the poems that were our favorites. This is what a crisis does. A crisis of any kind makes people go back to literature, because it is through literature which, we are able to perhaps cope up with an ongoing experience, critical experience.
In fact, it's not only Sarajevo, but it can be connected to any other location. India also experienced during this last April and May, it was India's moment of waiting for Godot.
Yeah.
People were literally out on the streets and waiting for something, waiting for announcement, waiting for food, waiting for a truck to come and carry to their village, waiting for vaccine, waiting for something. So if you look at it from waiting, predicament of waiting, and the absurdity of human situation, it's applicable everywhere. And that's the critical relationship. Not only Sarajevo, but it will be applicable to all other such places.
Yeah, are waiting for this, panacea, this vaccine itself is awaiting for Godot.
Yes, sir. Yes, yes. And thank you so much. Now, the last question from Ruta Dharmadikari.
I've written my questions in the chat box. Thank you for the opportunity. And first of all, I'd like to thank both the resource persons for the talks that we got to hear this afternoon. I have two questions, if I may.
Yes. Yes, ma'am.
First one is to Dr. Kamble. Can you name some contemporary Marathi poets who are writing protest poetry, sir? And to Dr. Banerjee, can you tell us if the refugee crisis, the global refugee crisis, has created protest literature? And can you name some of the writers?
Sorry, your voice.
Ma'am, please repeat your question.
To Dr. Kamble, what are the contemporary poets who are writing protest currently? Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
I saw your question.
Yeah, my question is there on the chat box.
Yeah. I didn't read much in the recent, because after taking English literature and after that, different pursuits I had, basically my reading is only in Dasa, Surve, like that. Not much Marathi poets.
Okay, the question on the chat, the second question is addressed to me. Can you tell us if the refugee crisis has created protest literature? I'm not sure whether such literature has come out of the English-speaking world. I'm not aware of that. But there has been a lot of poetry, yes, but I'm not sure whether you could call it protest literature. I always feel that if you're talking about the refugee crisis, especially in hotspot conflict zones like Syria, for instance, or Tunisia, for instance,
yes.
Sorry?
I meant Syria.
Yeah. I think I'm sure that such kind of literature is always evoked, whether in the form of poetry or whether in the form, they may not be available right now in translation in English, and I'm not aware of any such translations that have come forth in mainstream modern fiction. But I'm sure, wherever people are going through a crisis, the artist in them does bring out literature in some form or the other, because that's one of the ways in which humanity comes to grips with a crisis and gives them hope. So I'm sure that maybe over a couple of years from now, such literature will come to the fore. However, having said that, on the internet, there have been a lot of poetry that has been coming out on e-platforms and e-poetry zines, for example, relating to the refugee crisis. So it is the, you know, it is the hallmark of the humanity in us that we respond to any crisis by bringing out, by imagining and bringing out some writing of you know, some writing of one kind or the other. And I'm sure there are such kind of writings already available on the internet, whether in a published form, I'm not sure about that.
Thank you so much, both of you.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. That was the last question we had. So I thank you. Okay. Welcome, ma'am. I thank our distinguished speakers who were proactive on the deliberation and assimilation in this question answer hour. Due to your interesting discussion, sir, this question answer hour was seemingly very interesting. I also thank Madam and sir who have asked questions over here. Thank you so much. And now we move towards the valedictory session. Let me extend a warm welcome and thanks to Honorable Rao sir, the Secretary of our Dr.Babasaheb Charitable Trust, Amravati. He is always a moral boost for us, and his presence is enough to stimulate any task. We are waiting with full of ebullience to listen to you, sir. Honorable Rao sir.
Thank you, Dr. Varsha. Good afternoon to one and all. It's really a very nice day where we have got two eminent speakers, Dr. Rahul Kamble. Though he is from Maharashtra, he is working at my place, that is Hyderabad. And Dr. Pratik Banerjee. Really, today we have got a very literary feast to know about the topic, literature of protest. Since last 3 hours, we all have gathered virtually where we are having a discussion, as we have seen that question answer sessions where protest is there only for the sake of protest. And that too, as in the beginning, Dr. Varsha Gawande has mentioned, and which has also been referred by Dr. Pratik Banerjee, whether nature is also protesting, and as Wordsworth has said, what man has made of man. So whatever the case may be, I'm very happy that Dr.Babasaheb Ambedkar Mahavidyalaya of our institution has organized this one-day national webinar on the topic literature of protest. And they have invited very eminent speakers, resource persons, Dr. Rahul Kamble, who is from English and Foreign Languages University, Hyderabad. And he talked about protest in Dalit literature, the means for education and negotiation. And also Dr. Pratik Banerjee from Hislop College, Nagpur, who put his views about the issues of representation in times of conflict, the literature of 9/11. It was really, as I have mentioned, it was a literature of where a lot of things are going to be done in the future. But since time long, we are witnessing that there are many protests which are going on in the different fields. And all these fields, as our Honorable President Mrs. Kirtitai Arjun has mentioned in her inaugural speech, literature is the reflection of life. And whatever happens in any country, in the society, gets reflected in literature. And protest is also there. Since time long, we are witnessing all these things through literature. And as Dr. Rahul Kamble has mentioned about Namdev Dhasal, or Dr. Pratik Banerjee, he mentioned about Sontag. Whatever the case may be, I am also thinking about two great personalities, two Nobel laureates, Rabindranath Tagore and Wally Soyinka. One is from India and another is from Nigeria. One, he is pre-independent India when Rabindranath Tagore was there, and he reflected the atmosphere, the family life, the culture of Bengal. And another is there from Nigeria, who reflected the life of Nigeria. As we all know, Rabindranath Tagore, he emerged as a rebel dramatist, protesting against the prevalent social evils. In his writings, he often criticized the evil customs and superstitious beliefs. In Tagore's plays, there can also be found an undertone of spirituality. And particularly, the theme of self-discovery in relation to fellow men, maker, that is God, and the whole universe is the major idea of one of his play, Achalayatan. The play drives home the idea that true religion is not the institutionalized religion, but the religion of love, the path of uprightness and compassion in true religion's essence. There was a question asked to Dr. Rahul Kamble whether protest is there for the sake of protest, and he has also taken the question in today's context about this pandemic situation, where we can say सिर्फ कहने के लिए लॉकडाउन में कोई सड़क पर नहीं आया, सिर्फ कहने के लिए कोई लॉकडाउन में सड़क पर नहीं आया, पर हकीकत में घर बैठे कई लोग सड़क पर आ गए हैं. Actually, we don't know what exactly the situation is going on outside. There are many things which we don't know. How many people have lost their jobs, and whether they are actually getting food, bread and butter. So naturally, after we will pass this phase, there will be new writers who will going to write literature of protest on this pandemic also. When we think about Tagore again, during that time, in Musalmanir Golpo, Tagore also examines Hindu-Muslim tensions, which in many ways embodies the essence of Tagore's humanism. On the other hand, Darpan exhibits Tagore's self-consciousness, describing a young man harboring literary ambitions. Actually, if we think about Tagore, Tagore directly attacks the Hindu custom of glorifying Sita's attempted self-immolation as a means of appeasing her husband Rama's doubts. So see, these writers, they may belong, as Dr. Gadpaile, he has asked a question, and he was attacking on different religions or a particular community. What I feel is community or any religion, they don't talk about all these things. But what type of interpretations we take, that is more important. What the meaning between the lines we get, that is more important. Then we can come to Oli Sainka. He's a Nigerian playwright. And as we all know, he has to run away from his country, though he has got a Nobel in 1986. He also wants to represent the people of his society of Nigeria and how the political system of Nigeria, they are trying to make atrocities on their people. See, literature, as it reflects life, sometimes many writers, they may also have that bias in their mind about a particular religion, and that may also get reflected in that. And due to that, the reality, it gets tarnished. But as a student of literature, as Dr. Varsha has mentioned, history and literature are twin sisters. And when we think about twin sisters, we have to first think about the historical background of that particular nation or that particular society, and also the political background of that society, when we go to make a comment on whether really the protest was real or it is only for the sake of protest. I really thank all the participants, and particularly the two honorable resource persons, Dr. Pratik Banerjee and Dr. Rahul Kamble, that you have accepted the invitation of our institution and you have enlightened us on this particular topic. I congratulate Dr.Babasaheb Ambedkar Mahavidyalaya Principal Dr. Anjan Kumar Sahai, Organizing Committee Dr. Varsha Gawande, Professor Shuddhodhan Kamble, Dr. Khandare, and all the faculties. And once again, I wish you all the best. And in the near future, we also gather on a different topic to discuss virtually. Thank you very much, and stay safe, stay healthy. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. It was your motivation and support that we organized today's webinar. I express my gratitude for your motivational words, expressing deep thought, probing into the theme of the webinar with the aesthetics of pleasant and powerful human world. Due to your support, we could make this event successful, sir. Thank you so much, sir. Friends, though this is a literary feast, but the webinar is not waiting for Godot. And so this has to come to an end. A good event, although never ends, it takes a pause and keep us awaiting for the next. But then there is always a new beginning. We will emerge a new life after the pandemic. And this is the hope of today, where we are in the pandemic, and of course, a hope in the literature of protest too. I thank for the overwhelming response of the participants, the great orators for their enlightenment, and the management, our principal and the trustee, whose words will always enshrine in our hearts. And I now call upon Professor Shuddhodhan Kamble to deliver the vote of thanks of today's webinar. Thank you.
Good afternoon, one and all. First of all, I pay my homage to Bharat Ratna Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, our inspiration, Honorable Dadasaheb Gawai, and Saint Gadge Baba. We are in the last segment of this national webinar organized by Department of English and IQAC of Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar Mahavidyalaya, Amravati. We are grateful to Honorable Mrs. Kirtitai Arjun, President of Sri Dadasaheb Gawai Charitable Trust, Amravati, for agreeing to inaugurate this webinar and for sparing time from her busy schedule to grace the occasion and speak to us. We express a deep sense of gratitude to Honorable Professor P.R.S. Rao Sir, Secretary Sri Dadasaheb Gawai Charitable Trust, Amravati, for accepting our invitation and gracing the function with his address. Words are not enough to express our sense of gratitude to respected Dr. Pratik Banerjee sir and respected Dr. Rahul Kamble sir for agreeing to be the key speakers of this webinar. Without their support and cooperation, we could not make this webinar a success. We shall be failing in our duty if we do not thank Dr. Anjan Kumar Sahaya sir, principal of our college, for giving support to make this event successful. We are extremely grateful to all the participants for participating actively in the webinar and for being with us and encouraging our endeavor with the overwhelming response for this program. I also thanks my organizing team, Dr. Varsha Gawande ma'am, HOD of English Department, Dr. Sandeep Khandare sir, the librarian of our college, and all the teaching and non-teaching staff of our college who worked behind the screen to make this program a great success. With the permission of the chair, I now declare that the program is over. Once again, I thank you all. The feedback link is given in the chat box. All the participants, please submit the feedback and you will get the certificates within next 5 days. With this message, I say goodbye. So,
Thank you once again.
Thank you once again to all.